With the first part of the final season of Cobra Kai recently being released, we were given 5 episodes which were solely focused on the preparation of the Sekai Taikia tournament and the division that was forming between many of the characters. With an ending that provided a cliffhanger and also a sense of betrayal embedded within it, I thought I'd take a look at all that was known about what's to come in the next batch of 5 episodes and give my theories and predictions on what I think could happen next. So let's get into it. Here is Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 2, Everything We Know. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The story. In terms of the story for Season 6 Part 2, I think this entire final season is going to be a story that's split into a 3-part structure, not only in its release pattern, but in the way that the story's told to us. Part 1 was very much focused on trying to achieve balance, but there being division and secrets that were tearing people apart. Whether that be Mr. Miyagi's secret and it impacting Daniel LaRusso, the secret of Devon actually sabotaging Kenny so he couldn't go to Barcelona and she could, the betrayal that Tory carried out on Miyagi in siding with Kreese in the competition, Hawk not telling Dimitri that he wasn't going to college, and also the clashing of viewpoints and beliefs between Johnny Lawrence and Daniel. Whilst the first part was all about that, I think this second part is solely going to be focused on the Sekai Taikia tournament and seeing how the groups are going to be getting on. We know that there are several fights that are going to be taking place, but I reckon the final episode of Part 2 will conclude as the group are going to be going into the captain's fights, which are going to be televised. This will most probably mean that it's going to be Robbie against Kwon, who trained with Kreese and Master Kim, who it seems like could be a bit of a cheater and fight aggressive, and it will most likely be Sam against Tory. A rematch of the fight that we previously saw, and one which is going to be fueled by hatred on Tory's side, and the other which won't have any hatred within it at all, but the desire to just be friends. So I feel we'll see all of the surrounding fights happen, but not the main fight between the captains, because that's essentially the main fight of the season, and there'll be the most at stake. So having that occur right at the beginning of Part 3 will be the best way to keep all of us on the edge of our seats and wondering what's going to be happening when it returns for Part 3. I think the theme of the second part of the season, unlike the first, which was centered on division, will be about togetherness and the group having to work together as one to overcome their common enemy. We know that Dimitri and Hawk had a feud in Part 1 because Hawk didn't apply to go to the same college and he didn't tell Dimitri. This is something that impacted their friendship, but with them now both going to the tournament and spending time with one another, I feel we'll see them work through it and them both understand each other's side of the fence. Whilst there's probably going to be a heavy focus on the tournament in Barcelona, I think we're also going to be seeing a lot of the story still developing in the States. For example, Kenny was on the cusp of going down a destructive path in the first episode of this season, and with him being sabotaged by Devon, but him thinking that it was Anthony due to beating him in a previous round. I think with Daniel and Johnny not being there and him not having that grounding structure to channel his anger and work through it as he would have done in Miyagi, we could see Kenny go down the pathway that his brother told him to be careful of. This could mean that Kenny and Anthony's friendship will start to disintegrate, and even though Anthony will probably admit that he didn't do it, I don't think Kenny will believe it. Kenny will probably be mirroring a similar arc to Tory in the sense of distancing from the group that they both previously cared so much about. I also wonder if we're going to see Devon have any sense of guilt. Personally, I feel like she will. With regards to Kreese, I'm genuinely shocked at how he's not back in jail and has managed to avoid the authorities when not only walking around in broad daylight, but also traveling to different countries. I'm imagining that we're going to see Kreese get caught at some point, but I don't think it's going to happen in Part 2 of the show. I think that's probably going to happen in Part 3 when the televised part of the fight happens. Maybe he'll be spotted. Right now, it literally makes no sense at all as to why he's been able to just move around like he's a free man. So I hope they do find a way to make it seem a bit more believable. I actually think it might be Tory that ends up phoning the authorities on Kreese. We've seen her go to what is essentially the side of evil, but I think she'll soon realize that the fighting that she wanted to do, the fighting which her mother wanted her to learn, isn't going to be channeled in the right way when she's fighting with hatred burning within her. So I feel she'll realize that she needs to do the right thing and she'll end up changing sides and going back to Miyagi. That's where I think Part 3 of the show will then come into question and we'll see the group working on progression and moving forwards. Whether they win the competition or not, there's opportunities for all of them as they're going to be going to college. Johnny wants to find a new home for his family and the birth of his daughter's on the way, and many are also looking to see how the fighting that they've learned can propel them into some kind of career. It wouldn't actually surprise me if the likes of Hawk or Robbie ended up taking over Miyagi-Do, or if they set up their own dojo and continued the legacy of Mr. Miyagi. Whilst on the topic of Mr. Miyagi, I feel that part of the story and his secret that he had of being a silent partner in a boxing gym is going to continue being developed, but I think we'll see that continuing on through the perspective of Amanda LaRusso and Chosen, as we didn't actually see him in Barcelona with the rest of the group, so I feel that's where his involvement is going to be. One of the final things that I think we'll see happening in this part of the season is Johnny Lawrence and Daniel LaRusso continuing to clash. We know that they've had their different ways of wanting to train the group and also them saying that they're both going to part ways after the competition, so I think we'll see that mindset continue. They both might have different ideas for the different fighters on who they're going to be facing, and with Johnny Lawrence almost needing the group to win more as his family's house and future is on the line due to the sponsorship opportunities and prize money that could change all of their lives, I do think that Johnny and Daniel's relationship will eventually be repaired throughout the season. As I said, I don't think division is going to be the core theme of this part. It's going to be more about people having to work together and get together to overcome their obstacles. And Johnny and Daniel is the best example of people needing to do that. There's one theory that's kind of out there at the moment that's floating around, and I am questioning it just a little bit. There's a theory about John Kreese potentially being responsible for the death of Tory's mother. We know that John Kreese is a criminal, so maybe he wanted her dead so he could eventually get Tory back on his side. It would be a bit far-fetched, and the medical experts didn't seem to think there was any foul play involved in her death, so I guess we'll see with that. As you can see, there are genuinely so many different directions that this next part of the season could go in. I'm intrigued to see if any of it does happen, because there is quite a lot at stake this time round, especially with it being the competition that none of them want to lose. The only way they're gonna win is by defeating their biggest enemy that has now somehow made its way right in front of them. The release date. So in terms of the release date, we know that this final season is being split into 3 parts, which will go all the way to 2025. The second part of Season 6 is currently scheduled to arrive on Netflix on November the 15th of this year. So we've got a little less than 4 months to wait until we see exactly what happens at the Sekai Taikia tournament. It was originally supposed to arrive on Netflix a couple of weeks after the 15th of November, but Netflix decided to change the date recently, which is good for all of us viewers that are eagerly anticipating its return. Whilst we know that the third part of the season is set to arrive on Netflix in the new year, it hasn't actually been confirmed which date it's going to land on the platform. However, one would have to assume that they'd probably want to keep the same distance between different parts in order to keep the audience engaged. So I'm going to predict that the final 5 episodes will probably arrive 4 months after part 2, which will be in March next year. Unfortunately for now, that's all that's known about Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 2. There hasn't been a trailer released yet, but I imagine as we draw closer, maybe even in the upcoming weeks, Netflix might decide to drop one for us to watch. So, there you have it, Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 2, Everything We Know.